Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about nudging, the catalyst to ignite your love of learning. Just in case you're wondering, well, it is definitely a big part of the well-being science and it's part of our framework to address love of learning. And today we have Ross O'Hara with us in the virtual studio. And it's been really fun just chatting to him before we start. I'm going to introduce him to everyone and we'll get him to share a bit about himself before we get started. So Ross O'Hara, Ph.D., is a behavioral researcher at Persistence Plus, where he applies his expertise in behavioral science to develop scalable interventions that improve college student retention. He also travels the country talking about how nudging can reshape the college student experience. Prior to Persistence Plus, Dr. O'Hara earned his PhD in social psychology from Dartmouth College and completed postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Missouri and the University of Connecticut. His research has appeared in numerous peer-reviewed journals, including Psychological Science and Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and he has co-authored a chapter on behavioral nudging in the book Decision Making for Student Success. Well, that's a very interesting and rich bio there. I'm very keen to hear about this space because actually I used to work in the education space before joining LMSL. So this is really interesting to me, and I would love to learn more about this topic from you today. So please share with us a little more about, why you got here, because, it's not random that, you just choose to work in student success or, student retention. I'm sure there's got to be a story. So we'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me today, Lou. Very excited to talk about love of learning with you. And yeah, as far as that story goes, as you mentioned, I'm a social psychologist by training, and a lot of my research for a while was actually in adolescent risk-taking behavior, really focused on sort of understanding the origins of substance use behaviors, specifically alcohol, and developing interventions for that kind of behavior that can impact the college student experience, certainly. But it's been almost 10 years since I joined the organization I work for today, Persistence Plus. I was really looking to make a shift out of academia and really looking for an opportunity where I could do research and intervention work that would have a more sort of direct impact on student success than the typical work of a college professor where you do lots of research and publishing, and it's a much longer journey from anything you do to having some sort of like broader impact on student success behaviors. And so 10 years ago, Persistence Plus was a brand new startup founded by a woman named Jill Frankfurt. And the idea was to use everything we know about behavioral science and social psychology and behavioral economics to try to change students' mindsets around what it takes to be successful in college and how to persevere through all the challenges and so forth, and to deliver that all to students via text message. So the entire Persistence Plus platform is based in text message conversations with students, since we know, we say like, oh, college students, they're on their phones, they're texting all the time. But it's really everyone. And, and college students, we shouldn't think of it as, young people, 18 to 22 years old, especially in the United States right now. It's people of all ages are, going back to learn new skills and get new degrees and switch careers. And so it's really exciting work to be able to do that and be able to see, like, this technology and these interventions we've developed are just helping, hundreds, thousands of students just get to the next term and then get to the next term. And eventually that leads to a degree.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point because I do believe that there are better ways of engaging students and retaining students, especially when you mentioned that texting concept is kind of like interesting because everyone's on their phone all the time, and so it's really good to utilize the tools that we already have. Right? I actually remember back when I was working in the edtech space, we ran a lot of programs, and one of the key issues that we had actually was the same one that you're mentioning. Lots of students just dropped out of the program even though it was so great. It was basically a work integrated learning sort of program, a suite of programs, not just one program. And I remember that particular program we had about 1,000 students, and only about 600 showed up to orientation. And what we did was actually similar to what you were doing. We found a way to find all their phone numbers and send them a text message to remind them, hey, don't forget, there's another orientation coming up. So, please don't forget to join. And actually that helped. So I think eventually only about 100 dropped out overall, which is actually quite good considering how many students there are. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting thing. It's not just love of learning, which is what we're talking about today, but it's also what educators can do, right? Because there's got to be new strategies nowadays because there's so much going on. Students tend to probably drop out because they have other commitments, they get overwhelmed. I mean, I used to work in the space. I should shut up here, but yeah, it's just so much to talk about. And yeah, it's definitely a very important space to be in. So I really appreciate the fact that you're coming on and sharing your expertise with us, and especially from the other end, like how do we actually nurture this love of learning in student, given both ends? If we're the students, what can we do, and then if we're educators, what can we do? So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get into that bit, we have a section called Have You Met Ross? And we're going to ask you a few questions to get to know some of your favorite things. And this is our favorite way to get to know our guests. And I'm sure our audience will learn a lot from this through some of your recommendations. My first thing to ask, and this is my favorite question because I love reading, what is your favorite book?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. So I thought I would share kind of the book I'm enthralled with right now. So I've been reading. I tend to read a lot more fiction than nonfiction. I feel like that often makes me stand out in this world. Everyone's always talking about like the latest, behavioral science book, but I still read a ton of fiction. And so I've been reading this series called Sullen Ground. I brought it so I can put it up
Mm.
by an author named Sarah Asher. It was written a little over 10 years ago, but it's about a band of people trying to survive America descending into a modern day civil war. So it's kind of a novel of survival. And I'm on the second of four books, and I'm really enjoying it. And of course, like I said, it was written about 10 years ago, and talking about rising tensions in America, just feels more and more prescient 10 years later. And it's also, I'm from Michigan. I live in Michigan, and she too is from Michigan. And so it all takes place in Michigan. So that's always exciting because many of the locations and such that she references, like I know where those are and I've been there. So that's always fun to read in a book too.
Yeah, that's super cool. Thank you for the recommendation. Never heard of that before, and for you, it's extra special because you're actually living it in a way. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yes.
All right, so that's a book. What about a movie that you've enjoyed lately?
Yeah. So, you know, the last, I still feel like the last movie that just really blew me away was Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I just recently was able to watch it again because the first time I saw it by myself. And so after it came to streaming, I was able to sit down and watch it with my wife and be like, oh my God, you have to see this movie. It's so amazing. And yeah, I mean, that that movie, yeah, still when I thought about what was the last movie that I just adored was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that movie as well. I've only seen it once, but yeah, I have to say, like, I was in the cinema and I was kind of like, the first half of it, I was like, what am I watching? And then second half of it, I was like, oh, like pretty much that the whole time. That was, yeah, pretty good. I'm sure we have probably mentioned that movie on this show about 3 to 4 times up to this point, because a lot of guests are like you, if they've been loving that movie. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, cool. Now, you're our podcast guest today. And actually, a lot of our podcast guests are not podcast listeners. I wonder if you're actually one, though. And if you are, which one is your favorite?
I have to go with your former guest. Yeah, I'm not really a podcast listener so much. Yeah, a lot of my friends are always like, "Oh, you listen to this podcast or that podcast," and I'm like, when I put something on, I put on music. Like I'm always listening to music. So I'll say the last album I got that I loved is the new Olivia Rodrigo album, Guts. I think it's awesome. So I've been listening to a lot
Guts.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Guts. It's so good. But yeah, it's funny you say that because I'm a podcast host and actually don't listen to podcasts. I have absolutely not listened to podcasts over the past year. The only thing I listened to recently has been audiobooks and obviously lots of music. But yeah, I find audiobooks to be really helpful because like I try to rest my eyes and I feel like that's such a great way to rest your eyes while you still want to consume books. And sometimes you want to sit down and read, but sometimes it's just easy to like go for a walk and listen to a book. It's like great, you know? Anyway, so next one is a question about your role model. Now, a lot of our guests have one role model. Some of them have multiple role models. Some of them are kind of saying, I actually don't have one. So which train are you on?
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a particular role model. I think, there's a lot of people I've come across in my life, either, through education, professionally, or just, more in friends where, I see different traits I admire in different people and just try to kind of pull from the best of everyone to try to think about like, who do I want to be as a person? How do I think I want to continue to grow? So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't look at like one person as being like, oh yeah, that's the person I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think I used to have like one role model, in different phases in life. And then now it's kind of shifted to the mode where I just pick up things from everyone. I do believe that we learn a lot from each person that we, cross paths with, even if that person is not someone that you enjoy being around, especially those that you don't enjoy being around, you learn a lot from them. So I feel like I take a little bit from everyone. So I agree with you there. And finally, in this part, I would love to ask you about education. Now, you're an educator, but for you to get here in your career, obviously, you've taken many courses. So, which course that you've taken that really stood out to you and has still left an impact on you to this day?
Yeah, I think back to being an undergraduate and starting to take social psychology because I actually, when I went to college, I was an English major, and I said I read a lot of fiction. I wanted to write fiction, and like that was my whole like life vision for myself, was I was gonna be like the next Stephen King or somebody. And but I started taking psychology courses because it just seemed like a good idea. If I'm going to write books that feature people, I should know more about how people operate. Um, and but taking some of those early courses and just was able to just really fall in love with both the like the content of psychology, the knowledge we have about this is what makes people who they are, their personalities, their emotions, their motivations, but also the mechanics of psychology or the science behind it. Like I just loved the idea that you can be curious, learning for the first time, like, oh, you can be curious about why do people act a certain way. And there's a methodology for like, well, you can come up with an experiment and try to like test it, or you can write a really like particular survey and try to understand how certain behaviors relate to certain personality facets. Like I just fell in love with the whole thing. And so I I came to a point where I wanted to do a senior honors thesis in college, and I always thought like I was going to do some big creative writing project, and I found like I don't want to. I want to do like a big psychology project and learn something about people and publish it, and that's exactly what I did. It was my senior honors thesis, was my first professional publication, and so yeah, just those early psychology classes, and that led me on to grad school in psychology, and always just trying to learn more and more about how what makes people tick is a big part of my work and just my life. Like I just love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear because we're here to talk about well-being and love of learning and nudging and all that is, part of psychology. So, since you're here and you're just probably like just really passionate about psychology and different aspects of it, especially in the context of education, let's talk about well-being and today's topic. So, first thing first, how do you view well-being?
Yeah, so when I think about well-being, I think a lot about growth. That well-being isn't some like idealized state to achieve, where everything is stable and good in some way. Like I really think about well-being as sort of, yeah, this perpetual state of growth, and that's where for me personally, I'm always trying to find new ways to challenge myself, to learn new things. A lot of for me personally, a lot of like those challenges end up being like physical challenges. Back in 2018, I've always been a runner, but back in 2018, I ran my first marathon, and I've done two others since then. A big thing this I turned 40 late last year, and so last year I started to see a trainer and trying to do like strength training and something like, um, I've never wanted to lift a single weight ever in my life, and now I'm going to a gym, and like I'm no Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I've got some 25 pounders and I'm moving them around, and um, so yeah, that's tends to be the area in which I decide like I want to like challenge myself. But yeah, that's what I think about with well-being, is always just trying to find something where you're gonna grow and tackle some new challenge in some way.
It sounds like it evolves through the ages, right? Because it's like you're talking about marathon and strength training. It's kind of like this is something that you discovered being in this current phase in life, and with your age and with where you want to go. And I'm sure previously it used to be different things. Younger in life it'd be something else, and then later on in life you probably want to work on other challenges for your well-being too. So yeah, it seems like a journey, and I think that's quite in alignment with what we've heard so far on the show. But it's also kind of different because I don't think anyone was so open to share what they're actually going through right now. It's kind of like it's always been this broad concept of well-being because it sounds like a word that everyone knows, but no one actually knows what it's about. So that's cool to hear. Now, what about some misconceptions you think people have about well-being?
I think one of the biggest conceptions about well-being today is that well-being involves feeling good or being happy all the time. Um, in my work with supporting college students, I see this a lot, especially with the Generation Z students, um, who are, to their credit, like so much more open about issues around mental health, and so much more willing to get support with mental health issues, which is all incredible that those stigmas are starting to come down. Um, but sometimes, I perceive it almost the pendulum swings a little bit too far toward pathologizing like any type of negative feeling, and it's like feeling bad sometimes is part of the human experience, and that in itself is not a problem. um and I think you know the negative feelings make the positive feelings richer, and that's why we watch movies and sometimes like want to bawl our eyes out at the end, because it's part of it all. And so yeah, to me yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions is like anytime someone experiences like stress or anxiety, this is kind of the big one working with college students, is like any level of stress is like a negative thing. And that's one of the things we try to help reframe, is like stress and anxiety are not necessarily bad in the context of like college. Like before taking a huge exam, like some stress is good. Stress indicates like you care about this and you want to do well, and it motivates you to study or do whatever you have to do. If it reaches a certain threshold where you're crippled by it, or you can't get past it, then there's a challenge to address. Um, but that, negative feelings are not bad to have.
Yeah.
Actually, you should be having them.
Yeah, definitely. Because we learn so much from them, right? And I think that's kind of like the fun bit about life, where you go through a lot of challenges and difficulties, and then you learn, you grow as a human. Otherwise, how would you grow? I think it's actually the same for everyone. And I was actually talking to someone the other day, and it was really funny because they were kind of saying something about this particular relationship, and one is a girl that is kind of spoiled, and the other one is kind of like a girl that's just bringing this girl a lot of difficulties. And while this person was telling me the story, they were kind of saying, let's call them girl A and girl B. They were saying, because girl A has such an easy life, God probably sent girl B into their life to teach them some lessons. And I was kind of like, oh, that's a very interesting way to view that. But, it's kind of in alignment with what you're saying. Like someone has probably has a really great upbringing, an easy life, don't have to worry about much. And then they would probably come across people that bring them difficulties. And that's how they learn. Just part of life and part of improving your well-being constantly, because otherwise you won't know. So yeah, that's good to hear. And I think even though we have talked about it quite a bit on this show and also the Happiness Science show called Sarah Boost at LMSL, I think it's a message that needs to be reiterated time and time again, because we tend to forget. Like sometimes when our days get tough, I don't know about our audience or yourself, Ross, but for me, it's kind of like I have a tough day and I'm like, why is this happening to me? It's kind of like, actually, it's fine. You're learning from this experience, accept and move on and learn from it. Because sometimes I don't know if this is like a human thing or it's a me thing, but I tend to dwell on the past quite a bit. I'm like, I cannot take it back, but I just sit there and think about it. And that's not healthy or productive. So I'm slowly learning. And this is a good reminder for myself. Anyway, so today we're here to talk about nudging and love of learning. These are probably not new concepts. I would say most of us know what nudging and love of learning mean, but in the context of well-being, since we're talking about the well-being science here, could you please help us to define these concepts, to put things into perspective?
Sure. So, to start with love of learning, I would define that kind of in that same umbrella as seeking growth. That, to have that motivation to keep discovering new parts of yourself is going to continue with learning. And I think, when a lot of people hear learning or love of learning, they immediately go to like school, taking a class, and it could be that, I have plenty of, I have, one friend in particular comes to mind where she's always like trying to learn new skills. Like she's always taking classes to learn new art skills or cooking skills. And for her, that kind of love of learning leads to well-being. But it doesn't have to be that. You can learn in all sorts of ways. One of the ways I think about, I mentioned that I go to this trainer now. Give a shout out to Home Turf Gym in Royal Oak. Mo and Aaron work me out every Friday morning. Is like I'm just learning a lot more about my body, and how it works and how it's changing. Because as I mentioned, I turned 40, and you turn 40 and things don't work the way they used to when they were 20. And so like there can be sort of just like that way of personally learning about yourself. And so, yeah, I think of, in this case, like the love of learning is just having this love of yourself continuing to grow in different ways and embracing change. Then as for the nudging side of it, it's interesting to me to talk about it in this very like personal uh, realm, because often in the work I do, and we're thinking about nudging, tending to think it more of like a broader view of like how like uh, a university or like can change policies to affect like student experience. Often nudging gets used at this kind of like broader institutional level. Here, we might be talking more about at an individual level, and I think it just, to me, it just involves like, if you're going to want to keep growing, really just trying to set up your environment in a way, kind of set the stage for that to make it as easy as possible. And like there's all sorts of these different techniques out of behavioral science to just really like allow us to make change, which is a hard thing in the first place, just make it as easy as possible. And lean into our own tendencies and biases as human beings, so that way we're not just we're not fighting an uphill battle and making anything more difficult on ourselves than it has to be.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to understand these concepts in a new light, because I think for us, when we hear love of learning or nudging, we're kind of like, oh, schools, like we kind of start to freak out. A lot of people kind of go in that mode. But I think in the context of life and well-being, it's so much broader. Like for you, it's like the gym right now, learning about your body. Then that's not part of your formal education. You need to learn about this, and you're really interested, genuinely interested in that. And I think a lot of us forget about the fact that we continuously learn as we go. Like recently, like I discovered this a new thing called chess. It's not new, but it's new to me. And I never got to play as a kid, and now as an adult, like I'm discovering it, and it's kind of like, okay, now I'm learning about all these moves. This is so interesting, but it's going to take me some time, because I'm probably not going to learn as fast as a kid, but it intrigues me, and I want to set aside time to do it. But I definitely need some nudging, because I have other priorities, and then the days just go by and then forget about it. But I do think that it's kind of interesting when you think about love of learning, because it could be this intense feeling of, oh, I would love to learn about something, versus actually, oh, I love learning about this. Let me set aside some time to do it right now. I think there's a little bit of a gap there. And I think love of learning is actually a character strength, because, based on research, first of all, that's what it is, a character strength. And second of all, I think that a lot of people are just so quick at like sitting down and picking up something and learn it straight away, and not put it off, and not like, oh, I'm intrigued about that, but let me come back to it. Because I noticed that some of my friends are kind of like, oh, what is that? Oh, let me ask some questions. Let me do some research. And then they go straight into this deep dive of learning about something completely new on the spot, without having to prepare, like setting aside time. I'm that kind of person. It's probably not my character strength, because I have to like set aside time, and like, okay, now I'm gonna sit down. I'm actually gonna do this, because I cannot be just spontaneously digging into a new topic. So how do you think that actually works? The love of learning being a character strength, and how does that actually impact our well-being?
Yeah, I relate to you, Lou, and like I will not spontaneously deep dive into something. I'll be like, oh, well, this is a good idea. Maybe I'll get a book from the library, and then when I have time, I'll sit down and read it when I'm feeling uh, lively and like I can absorb a book, and really have to plan things out. And so, yeah, I think with yeah, I love how you phrase love of learning as this character strength. Because, as I mentioned before, I tie a lot of this to growth, and there's a lot of research on growth mindsets and the impact of those on well-being. And a lot of people tie growth mindsets again to like school and education. And there's certainly been a lot of research there about, from children all the way through to college students, about having this growth mindset, this idea like that you are capable of learning new skills and new content areas. sets the stage for you mentally to be able to achieve it in school. But there has been research beyond that where you can have growth mindsets about all sorts of things, and people with growth mindsets tend to um, you know uh, like there's been studies like people are less aggressive in response to like slights, that they're more kind of willing to forgive people, because if you believe people can grow and change, like then you hope that someone who has somehow offended you could learn from that experience and grow and change from that. People with growth mindsets keep dying things back to exercise. Will exercise more because they believe like that they're capable of doing that, and exercise or changing your diet will have the types of impacts on your body that you would hope they were. And so, yeah, so when we think about love of learning as a character strength, I think it goes beyond just like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I, could know everything about World War II and learn to play the guitar and like just learn things for the sake of learning things, which I'm kind of a huge bar trivia guy, so I love learning things for the sake of learning things.
Yeah.
But it really becomes more part of like just how you approach life in general, in terms of being able to look at you know challenges or obstacles in your way, whether it's at work or with family, or in your personal life, and being able to say like, oh, I can figure out how to move past this. I can learn new things to handle this situation or that situation.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think it is a character strength indeed. And I like that you tied it with growth mindset, because a lot of the time it's just us thinking that we cannot do something and we stop ourselves from learning in the first place, where we in fact can actually learn new skills no matter how old we are. Because I think that's another thing too. A lot of people kind of saying, oh, like I'm too old for that, like I'm too old to learn whatever, like even the gym. Like I love going to the gym, I love trying new things, and sometimes they would, we have fitness circuits at our gym, and it's kind of like they would throw in weird things every now and again. And to me, it's kind of like, okay, I get to learn this new exercise, and I get to, experiment with my body and just kind of see how it goes. And I have the same conversation with someone, and they were kind of saying, oh, I don't think I can learn that kind of thing because I just have really bad memories. And, like, because when you go to fitness circuits, you kind of have to remember what the exercise does. And then when it's time, when it's the time, and then the clock ticks, you just have to go and do it. And I think that's actually like, this is actually good mental exercise, because you try to remember the exercise. Maybe the first few times you won't remember all of them. You probably remember half of them. And that's okay, because next time when you go in, you probably will remember more than half, and so on and so forth. So it's actually good for I think it's good for our memory training too, because sometimes I have the same thing. I'm kind of like a little hesitant because I'm like, I'm not that great at memorizing things or remembering things as they go. But I went anyway. And you know what? I enjoyed the process of learning that. And when I mess up, the trainer will come and they'll be like, actually, this is supposed to be done that way, not that way, So it's kind of like, it's fine because everyone is learning, right? So it is a character strength. And I think it takes courage to have that love of learning, and it takes courage to have that growth mindset. But it is definitely something we should infuse into everyone, because it's so important in life. It would be so stagnant and life would be so boring without it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned nudging earlier, right? And we've discussed love of learning at length now. Let's go to nudging, because we understand, as I understand from what you explained, nudging is kind of an enabler for love of learning, because sometimes you kind of need it. In this context, we are talking about individuals. And obviously, I think nudging can come from different sources. It can come from within, or from external sources. So how does that actually work? Because when it comes to learning, we've got a lot of obstacles. We can be a little bit hesitant, we can be lazy, we can have procrastination. We don't want to start something because we have that fear of failure. So how does nudging actually work in that context? And how does it play out in real life? Does it just look like somebody else has to nudge you, or does it look like you can nudge yourself in different ways?
Yeah, so this is kind of I think the bread and butter of what I do professionally at Persistence Plus. So in that case, we're, taking what we know about nudging and what motivates people to go from just, wanting to do something, like you talked about having friends who say like, I want to learn, but then it doesn't actually happen, to taking that action. And so in that case, like the nudging is coming from this external source, this text messaging platform that is trying to kind of nudge students along to make sure they're, studying and, participating in campus activities and kind of having the full educational experience. So they, persist and they earn their degree and they're ready for the next phase of their lives. But you can still do that to yourself individually. And so there's just so much rich research out there now about kind of what motivates people to grow and change. And it's just sort of about identifying things that resonate with you and trying to use those to their maximum impact. So just for, a couple examples, I noted down, one thing people were talking about a lot in the last month is something known as the fresh start effect.
Mm.
So with New Year's Eve and people setting New Year's resolutions, this topic always comes up. But the fresh start effect is just the idea that we're more motivated to do anything really when it's like the start of some time frame versus the end. And this could be something as simple as starting something on a Monday morning because it feels like it's the new week, it's a new time. As I mentioned, New Year's Day is sort of supposed to be like the granddaddy of fresh starts because everyone is just like it's a new year, and that's why everyone sets these resolutions. Which I, from my personal experience, like I don't do New Year's resolutions because my feeling living in Michigan is that it's too cold and dark to start anything new. But I'm big about like the spring. Like once the snow melts and it starts to warm up, then I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna accomplish all this stuff. And so for me, like the spring is that fresh start. But psychologically, what's in theory going on is that you're sort of, when you take these fresh starts, you're sort of taking your old self and putting it behind you and being like, this was the old self that never will. I'll keep using the gym. It's a good one to keep using. Like,
Yeah.
my old self, old Ross, like did not get up early enough to make it to the gym, or would have an obstacle like it's too cold. I'm not going to go. That was old Ross. But now that it's a new week, it's a new month, it's spring, whatever kind of works for you psychologically to feel like this is a new start to my life, that then you sort of see yourself as this new person. And that can be really, really motivating. And now there's all sorts of other ways you have to look at your situation to know, like, are some of these barriers just going to creep up again? One of the things I think is really important around this whole idea of nudging is like, people think sometimes you can just use the psychology and kind of trick your brain into anything. But that, like, you can't trick your brain into just living a reality that doesn't exist. And so some of these things can provide the motivation, but then you really have to look at, other ways to, structure your environment to help you succeed in your goals. Like, just to have an example, I think about if you're trying to, like, change your diet, you can decide like Monday, I'm starting this diet, I'm going to be this new person, I'm going to eat better. But if your cupboard is filled with chips and cookies and all sorts of unhealthy things, like, there, soon as you walk by, all the temptation is going to be there. Nothing has really, really changed. You can only motivate yourself with nudging like so long.
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on a lot of different factors, and our environment also matters too, right? Because a lot of the learning and the growing happens in that space where you kind of have this optimal condition to grow. I was actually reading this book. I've been reading this book recently. I haven't finished it, but it is so interesting. It's kind of tying into this. It's Hidden Potential by Adam Grant, my favorite author, and he's been exploring the idea of hidden potential and how we can bring that out. I think it's kind of like it's tying right into our topic of love of learning. The reason being, in one of the chapters, he was talking about the fact that when you have the right educator, the right teachers in I think in kindergarten, that will nurture a lot later in life for you. And sometimes a lot of people think that the past is like prime age to learn new things or to actually grow professionally, and that's just kind of this mental block, because a lot of people actually end up having their best growth phase when they go through a period of like being really down, but they still have the support from certain groups of people. And it's kind of like this, it's not linear, so it's kind of like they go down and then they go up again, and then when they actually go up, they're at their peak of their career. And there's so much that the book explore, but I think it's perfect in the context of nudging, because we need to have the right environment and the right group of people surrounding us to have that kind of nudging. Because I think a lot of the times when I think about nudging, I think about shaming. And that's kind of like how I was brought up. And a lot of kids probably were brought up that way. Like, if you don't do this, you're going to end up being so and so. Right. And it's actually not like that. It's, if something is good for you, then the right kind of nudging and the right kind of direction would really help to nurture that love of learning. Otherwise, you're probably just going to be traumatized and you don't want to learn that ever again. Like I remember this so well, because I remember I was, so for context, for our audience and for yourself who don't understand what I'm talking about, English is not my native language. I'm Vietnamese. I speak Vietnamese. English is my second language. And I used to be this sort of like kid that just learned whatever was brought to me, and I didn't really like explore. But I remember this particular story because I was in class learning how to pronounce Wednesday, and I think I made like a really funny version of it, and the whole class laughed because I pronounced it wrong. But the teacher was saying in a really calm voice, "Stop laughing. There's nothing to laugh about. This is a learning process. How about you try pronouncing it this way?" And then everything was well, because if she had also joined in the laughing, I think I would have given up on it by now. But guess what? I'm hosting a podcast. I mean, 2 podcasts in English. So it worked out well. But I think it was the right kind of nudging to overcome that obstacle, because a lot can happen in that condition. And I do think that this is the job of not just educators, but also everyone around us, especially for people that are dealing with kids, because they can accidentally cause trauma without knowing. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, and goes back to where we were talking about growth mindset. And I think one of the areas where the research on growth mindset has really been trending in the past few years is, after the concept came out from Carol Dweck, and there was lots of research and became very popular to say like, oh, we need to teach kids these growth mindsets so they know that they can learn new skills and content, and it became a big part of education, but it didn't always work right. And so what a lot of researchers have looked at is like, yeah, that larger context of, you can't teach a child growth mindset like, oh yeah, you are, totally capable of learning English, and then have the teacher laugh at them when they mispronounce Wednesday.
Yeah.
Like, that situation is going to overrule that, whatever, growth mindset there was. And so, there's been a lot looking at just the importance of, yeah, the teacher's growth mindset. And this goes all the way up through college. So we don't even have to talk about like, oh, it's just important for little kids. It's another one of those like growth mindset misconceptions, like a little
Yeah.
kid thing. Because there's been studies of, of science professors in college and having if they have growth mindsets, a lot of their students do better, especially students who come from stigmatized groups who feel like they, don't belong in the science profession. So racial ethnic minorities and women do
Mm.
better when their professor has a growth mindset. When schools, when they kind of survey teachers and students across the school, if they have more of a growth mindset happening environmentally, it sort of sets the stage for any individual who's sort of trying to adopt a growth mindset for it to work. And to me, that's one of the big things of like my whole educational and professional career in social psychology has been sort of the understanding how environments and context and the social structures around us, the impact they have. And it's, any type of like, learning growth you're trying to do for yourself, if you're up against a really harsh environment in some way, like maybe a teacher who's not supportive or classmates who are laughing at you, like it's really hard to beat the environment on your own. It's almost impossible a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a good point. I think that's one of the challenges that we would face when it comes to nudging, right? Because it's like the right environment, the right people, and so on. What about some of the limitations that we should look out for when we are using nudges to promote the love of learning?
Yeah, so I mentioned one before, and it ties into what I was just saying about thinking like you can nudge yourself past, an environment that is not conducive to learning and growth. So to take it back to my work with college students, we have to try to balance a lot of our messaging around like, yes, we want to nudge students to feel motivated to learn and like they are capable of growth, and they can tackle any of these challenges. But we also need to guide them to think about how to put that in the context of their lives. We mentioned earlier, students today go through so much. The idea of a college student who like goes to college and all day, every day, like going to college classes and learning and doing their homework and passing exams is everything in their life. Is like that is going away. At minimum, almost every college student today like works for works in a job uh, a good amount of the time. So many in the United States, over a fifth of all college students have children, and so that's obviously right there. College is best your second priority,
Yeah.
um, and so trying to have those strategies around how are you going to make the environment work for you. And so we try to like help with strategies around like finding better places to study that are conducive to learning, or ways to connect with resources on campus that are going to help you learn. A lot of the students we work with have a lot of financial difficulties. So like before we can even really talk about nudging and love of learning, we need to make sure they're connected to the right resources so they have food for them and their families every day, and a place to sleep, and these really like basic necessities. It all directly goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if they're not safe and secure and basically healthy, like there's no point in talking about learning and growth. Um, and so I think that's to me one of the biggest challenges, kind of treating nudging as this like silver bullet that's going to push people past really difficult circumstances. And it's not that magical.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely something to look out for, because this is sort of a new thing that we are slowly going to discover as this war is just going to keep progressing, and it's going to get more complicated. All the tools that we're using, and sometimes you feel like you don't have to learn because everything is at your fingertip, and that's another thing. Like when it's so easy to get information, it's even harder to cultivate this love of learning. And then you have the nudging from different sources, and you're kind of like, I don't even know why people are nudging me to do this, to learn this, while I can just simply, chat GPT it out. Like I don't really have to learn it. So I think there's a lot to kind of think about, and maybe this conversation will become obsolete in 5 years because there will be some other tools that will emerge and say you actually don't have to learn. Here's everything you need. That's my worst fear actually. Just to wake up one day and you're like, you don't need to learn anything. You can do anything without learning. That'd be so scary. Like anyway, it sounds really irrational, but it's kind of scary as well. So let's talk about practice that, our audience can take away from today, because obviously it's a lot of theoretical discussions that we've had. But for someone who is here, I'm sure they clicked on this podcast because they would like to nurture their love of learning. So what would be a practical thing that you would recommend to them? Maybe this is something you do yourself to cultivate your love of learning.
Sure. So one of the things I've been working on personally in the last year, and I think is a really good practice that again kind of ties together with like love of learning and well-being, is just thinking about mindfulness. You mentioned earlier, Lou, that you're having this tendency to dwell on the past. I feel like I have the tendency to dwell on the future, to like think about, to get too far ahead of myself, of thinking like, well, if this happens and this will happen, and kind of navigating my way to like, what's the worst possible outcome, and I'm gonna think about that all day. So I've been working a lot on sort of mindfulness, kind of like staying in the moment, and so anytime I'm sort of frustrated, feeling anxious, kind of feeling myself kind of going down that path of like just worrying about the unknown of the future, trying to take a few minutes and do like a body scan meditation, which I just kind of do myself. I don't have like a particular like one I go to on the internet or something and listen to. I'll just be like standing in my kitchen and being like, oh, I feel feelings right now, and trying to like do that kind of scan from from like the bottom of my feet all the way up through my head for a couple of minutes. And I think it's really important for so much of when we're talking about love of learning, because like I was just saying about like there's certain basic physical and emotional needs we have to take care of before we can think about learning and growing. And as we have already talked about, learning in and of itself is, can be frustrating. Part of the point is to be frustrated, because that's where you're going to find new parts of yourself and make new connections. But, you have to get past that emotional, any of those emotional blocks that may have developed from past learning experiences that did not go well, or where you did feel sort of shamed or humiliated. And so that's something I've really been trying to put into practice in life
Yeah.
lately.
Super cool. I think we've talked about mindfulness a few times on the show, but I think that's good to hear, because it helps to put things in context and a little bit easier to digest. Because some people might go, "Okay, I'm gonna have to nurture my love of learning. This is gonna be a lot. I'm a little scared. What do I do?" I think it's actually as simple as that. Mindfulness sometimes actually, because I feel like a lot of the times I myself would probably want to do something. And this could apply to learning new things or even doing other things in life. Let's just say I want to learn something new, and then I'm overwhelmed because I could be thinking about the past. And actually, I'm on the same train as you, thinking about the future too. I'm not just dwelling on the past. Like my anxiety would come out someday, and then it's just going to take over when I start thinking about scenarios that's going to probably never going to happen, but I still think about it. And that takes away all my time. And I cannot learn anything because I've been busy thinking about this one thing that's happening and dwelling on it. And maybe dwelling something that's not even happening. And all that energy could have been spent on actually learning something new. So I think this practice would definitely be very helpful for our audience, in case they're kind of wondering, why are you guys talking about mindfulness when it comes to the level of learning? Well, I think it makes perfect sense. If it doesn't make sense, listen to this again. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Now, as we are closing the podcast today, as I mentioned, we've got Open Mic, which is a platform for you to talk about anything that you are passionate about, that you haven't got the chance to share yet. I know you would like to talk a little bit more about your work. So take it away, Ross.
Thank you, Lou. Yes. So I've already mentioned a little bit about Persistence Plus and how we connect with college students over text message and try to do this nudging to help them continue their love of learning, which they are doing in that formal setting and usually for very like practical goals around earning a degree and getting a better job, moving on with their career. Um, but I've talked a lot about like environments as well, and the fact that any amount of nudging students and students kind of believing like I have a growth mindset, I can do this, are going to run into a wall if the learning environment doesn't support those types of ideas. So I've been at Persistence Plus almost a decade now, and that's something I continue to realize is how important those environmental conditions are. And so I've been pushing more and more to try to help colleges change how they operate and help faculty change how they teach. And I'm certainly not the only. I don't want to make it sound like I'm the only person in sort of the higher education space with these ideas and doing these things. There's a lot of great people out there talking about making colleges like student centered or student ready, and kind of thinking about behavioral science or nudging is a big part of that. So a lot of what I've been doing over the past couple of years, which I really love, is the opportunity to um, travel to colleges and meet with faculty or the advisors who kind of work with students day to day on all the parts of college you need to get through that aren't just sitting in the classroom and learning stuff and then taking the test. Um, and administrators, it's so important to try to connect with the people who make college policy. Um, in some ways, they are, they're the most distant from the student, but in some ways, the most important, because those policies are going to determine how those faculty teach and how those advisors advise, and what the student experience is like. And trying to help them embrace behavioral science as a way to think about student success. So just where I mentioned how there are just all of these different strategies as an individual for just trying to make learning and growth simpler for you, that these institutions can do that for their students by kind of trying to build things around how the human brain works and how motivation works in a way that hasn't always been a part of the educational experience. And so that's just kind of been more the passion of mine in my work, is trying to help all of these students who have this love of learning and they're bringing it into college, keep that fire burning and allow them to achieve their goals.
Mhm. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I'm not sure about other people listening to this message, but for me, it sounds heartwarming because, I love the education space. And that's what we're here to do at LMSL too. And I think there needs to be so much more work in this space because it's challenging. And a lot of the times we kind of stray away from learning and focus more on a lot of other things that I don't know how to call and name. It's just it's a little bit ridiculous sometimes. And I do hope that, with the wonderful work that you're doing and the lessons that we have been learning today, we are going to nurture our love of learning and focus a bit more on learning and a little less on the other things that probably don't matter as much. So thanks again for being here. And speaking of your work, where could our audience find out more about it?
Yeah. So definitely through Persistence Plus, which is www.persistenceplusnetwork.com is our website. And then I write a monthly blog on the website of Psychology Today. It's called Nudging Ahead. So every month I pick a topic, usually related to higher education. Sometimes I go into some random musings because it's my blog and I can do what I want.
Yeah.
But always tied into, teaching some sort of element of behavioral science and usually how it relates to student success, but also I think just sort of individual success as far as love of learning and well-being go. And a lot of those lessons you can apply to yourself. And it's another joy I get from, teaching people about behavioral science. Is, I find so many times, even when I'm talking about, well, this is how you apply it to student success, people will be like, oh, I see how to apply this to my own success. And that's great as well. So nudging ahead on Psychology Today is a great resource. I've been doing it for like 6+ years. So there's a lot of content there to learn from.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing. And thanks again for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I had a lot of fun.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.